Hello, I'm Declan Carey, and this is the Redaction Politics Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be updating you on the US election, which is now 36 days away. We're also going to be talking about the Labour Party, which has a narrow lead over the Conservative Party for the first time since Boris Johnson became Tory leader. Later on, we're going to look at regional government around the UK and how that could be better. And we're going to take a look at eco-fascism and the impact it's had on the world. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since we last met, and a lot has changed, especially in the US, not least the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which has had a big impact on the country and the election. Richard, how big of an impact will Ruth's death be?
Well, I think it's going to be huge, to be honest. It's interesting to see how little the race has changed in terms of the polls. Just to start with, in the first 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, everything has remained largely stable. The lead that Biden has over Trump has remained largely the same as is his lead in certain battleground states. But yeah, you're right. So the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg has the ability to change this race quite fundamentally. So for those of us who aren't aware of how the kind of the system works in the US. The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. They can retire or they can die. And what happens is that a president will nominate a justice to be put on the Supreme Court, and that justice must be confirmed by the Senate just by a simple majority, 51 votes, and then they're put on the bench for life. So the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died has now given Trump the opportunity to nominate a third justice in his term, which is pretty unheard of. If he gets this new justice confirmed, it'll mean that the court will move quite significantly to the right, and it will remain there for almost a generation. All three of his justices, or the justices that he nominated, are on the younger side. I think they're all under 50, actually, with the possible exception of Gorsuch.
Gorsuch was under 50 when he was nominated. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're certainly not long in the tooth by any judicial standard. And what the issue is, in the last year of Obama's presidency, a similar thing happened. Justice Scalia died, and Obama duly nominated somebody called Merrick Garland, and the Senate said, absolutely not. We're not having a vote on him because it's a presidential election year. Well, you can fast forward 4 years, and a similar thing has happened. And what do you think the Senate is saying? Come on. Let's have a vote. We want to get this guy confirmed, or this girl confirmed, as quickly as we possibly can. It's interesting as well because I've been thinking a lot about it, and there are advantages and disadvantages to this. At the moment, the Republicans are saying we need to push through this confirmation process as quickly as we possibly can, almost in a kind of, we know we're going to lose in November and we need to change as much as we can before we're out of power. But I'm a little bit wary about what might happen to the motivation for Republican voters. When Trump was running in 2016, a lot of evangelical voters were unsure of him, and largely because of the crass comments that he's made in his lifestyle in general, and the fact that he's probably of no religion himself. But he then did say, right, okay, I'm going to nominate a number of these justices, a number of these conservative justices, and it sort of swung their vote. Now, if he confirms this third conservative justice, the evangelicals have got their wish. They've got 3 right-wing justices on the court, and they may not be as motivated to turn up in November. So I think it remains to be seen, but I think there are risks for this to happen. I think in terms of the votes, it's unlikely that the Democrats are going to be able to get anything, going to be able to stop this. The Republicans have quite a sizable majority, 53-47 in the Senate. 2 senators have come out and said that they won't support a vote until after the presidential election, but only 2. So that doesn't matter. So at this stage, the Republicans look like they have the numbers to get this through. So barring any kind of massive scandal, something about this justice that we don't know about, I can see this as being quite a smooth confirmation process, and Amy Coney Barrett will be on the Supreme Court by election day, in my humble opinion.
Yes, of the initials ACB rather than ACAB.
Indeed.
But who would have thought it that Mitch McConnell would be such a shameless hypocrite? Who would have thought it?
Who would have thought? If anything, if you've got to look historically. McConnell was a big part of the nomination of a guy called Robert Bork in 1987. And Robert Bork was nominated to the Supreme Court by then President Ronald Reagan. And the Democrats were able to block his nomination. And it seems like he has a long memory, does Mitch McConnell, because now he's doing everything he can to get back at the Democrats, having been able to successfully block Merrick Garland, and now to add another 3 justices to the Supreme Court. It's also going to be interesting to see what the Democrats do if they do indeed win the presidency and the Senate. There's some talk about them increasing the number of seats on the Supreme Court. There's nothing in the Constitution that states that there has to be 9. In fact, there have been periods in the Republic where there have been less than 9, and periods where there have been more than 9. So there's every chance that they may increase that number by 4 or 5. They might also try to get DC and Puerto Rico statehood, which would give another 4, which would mean there would be another 4 Senate seats, because each state has 2 senators, no matter how big or how small they are. And another interesting thing that I read this week is that there's been a call to break California up into 5 different states. Wow. To reflect its massively diverse background. At which point you would obviously have another, if there were 5 states of California, there'd be 10 senators rather than 2. So the political games will continue to play out through the election and beyond.
Yes, but before we go a bit further into this, let me just, for the benefit of our listeners on the podcast, just introduce who our guests are, of course. Of course, we've got James Moules, our contributing editor, and Mason Quah and Richard Hansen, our reporters. On this issue, I mean, how significant could this be on the result of the election? Let's say Trump loses and we have a majority Conservative Supreme Court. Is there any way that we can see some problems with that if Trump refuses to leave the White House? James?
Well, let's be clear. There already is a Conservative majority on the court. It's 5-4 already. And this would massively reshape the court and realign it towards the Conservatives if Trump's nominee is approved. The big fear, of course, is if we're seeing a Bush v. Gore style scenario with the Florida recount, and just how much such a Conservative court could affect the election, potentially in Trump's favor. Obviously, as I mentioned in the previous episode of this podcast, the Supreme Court at the moment hasn't necessarily been so favorable to Trump. I mean, Neil Gorsuch voted against Trump on the transgender legislation. So having this extra justice in his pocket against someone as liberal as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the most stalwart liberals on the court, is obviously going to be a massive bonus to Trump.
It's worrying. I've written a couple of pieces for Redaction Politics in the last few weeks about this sort of situation. I think it depends how the election takes shape, but there are some seriously frightening scenarios that might occur if this election is very close. And I don't mean frightening in that Trump will be given 4 more years. In fact, that would be quite simple in comparison to a number of these situations. The Supreme Court doesn't always weigh in on these issues. The reason why they weighed in 2000 is because there was a recount going on in Florida, and they ruled that the state of Florida's Supreme Court had overstepped its purview in making sure that recount continued. I think what's more terrifying is there's a situation brewing in Pennsylvania whereby there is a Democratic governor, but there's also a Republican-led legislature. And Pennsylvania, as we know, is a swing state. It went for Donald Trump in 2016, went red in 2016 for the first time in quite some time. And there's also every chance that Donald Trump will appear to have pulled ahead on election night. But as the postal votes come in over the next few days, it's more than likely that Joe Biden will regain that lead. But there's also every chance that the Democratic governor could certify Biden as the winner, and the Republican legislature could certify Trump as the winner. What would happen then is that the Electoral College, the 20 electoral votes of Pennsylvania, those are actual people that come to Washington and physically cast a ballot. And it depends on who wins that state, whether those 20 people are 20 Democrats or 20 Republicans. Now, there's every chance that 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans could be sent to Washington on December the 14th. And that would be almost an unheard of situation whereby the Senate would have to decide what to do. The Senate being the Republicans being in control of the Senate. Mike Pence could decide, the vice president, as president of the Senate, could decide, well, I'm only going to count the Republican electors, or he could say, well, there's Democratic electors and Republican electors, so I'm going to cancel that out, and I'm not going to count Pennsylvania's votes at all. And the election could hinge on Pennsylvania. Nate Silver of 538.com believes that Pennsylvania will be the tipping point state. The 270th electoral vote will come from Pennsylvania. So, and all the while there will be protest after protest, violence after violence situation on both the red side and the blue side. So, and meanwhile you've got Supreme Court. They may be asked to weigh in on it, and there will be a conservative majority on that court with or without this new nomination. So I really genuinely am fearful for what's going to happen in the next 6 or so weeks.
Yes, it's certainly going to be an interesting time. And one thing that we've got to look forward to is going to be live debates between Trump and Biden. I've already been reading a little bit about that, and reports are coming out that Trump is going to go blisteringly personal, which...
Well, what do we expect?
Yeah, I think not many people will be surprised by that. Mason, how do you think Joe Biden would fare in a live debate against Trump?
I think he's going to fare poorly, unless they put him on like whatever it was he was high on when he was debating Bernie. He's not going to do well against Trump. And even then, it's going to be like that. Means that like in that situation, we've got one good performance out of Sleepy Joe, and then he crawls back to his cave for a couple of months, which isn't an ideal situation either. I don't think he's going to perform well in live debates. I think it'll be very entertaining just to watch the two of them slug at each other, but I don't think that it's going to be a good look for the Democrats.
I think it's a case of lowering expectations on the Democrats' side, and I think we're doing a good job of doing that in this podcast now. But I think the question that really needs to be asked is, never mind the debate shenanigans, never mind the slugging at each other. Is this going to move the needle? Is this going to convince people to change their mind, or in fact to convince them to vote for one or the other? Nothing in this electoral race really in the last year has moved the needle significantly, and I would be very surprised if the debate does so. Historically, sitting presidents fare badly in the first debate because for the first time in 4 years there's somebody standing on the podium next to them as basically an equal. And they don't prepare, and they think, who is this upstart coming in? I'm the president of the United States. How dare you?
Yes, they don't have to do PMQs in the States.
No, exactly. They don't have to justify themselves on a regular basis. So I agree with you, Mason. I think Biden is going to struggle with Trump's chaotic approach, but I think it remains to be seen whether that does move the needle.
Well, I think that's the point. I think we saw that in 2016 as well. With those Clinton versus Trump debates, I don't think they would have changed very much, because those two candidates were playing to massively different audiences. Mm-hmm. To a Clinton supporter who already had their mind made up, Clinton would have clearly won those debates. To a Trump supporter, Trump would have done. I don't think there was much in any of those three debates that would have swung people either way.
No, the only thing that I might that might help swing the needle further in the Democrats' favor is actually the fact that Kamala Harris is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so she will be front and center in this Supreme Court confirmation. She'll have a lot of free airtime to talk to this to talk to Judge Barnett. So that may help, because obviously she is a prosecutor by nature. She may be able to change some minds, but I think the debate itself is going to be a largely do no harm, no foul situation, unless Trump or Biden do something. Even if they do something major, I just can't see the undecideds changing.
I think if Biden does manage to pull something major off, manage to get some sort of proper flustered response from Trump that makes him look poorly, I do think that would have some effect, because there's a large amount of Trump's base that follow him because they see him as the strong figure, that he is the strong man. Yes. If that gets undermined in the debates, which I don't know if Biden is capable of doing, then that would weaken him.
Like what's Trump going to say then? I was unfairly treated. The moderator was on Biden's side. That's what we're going to hear.
Yeah, like last time, Hillary was given the questions in advance, is what he said last time. And also, I think it was it the second debate that happened immediately after the Access Hollywood tape?
Correct, yeah.
Which didn't derail his campaign and in my humble opinion, very much should have. We spoke about this on the podcast 2 weeks ago, that the best way to defeat Trump is to talk about Trump and his character failings rather than to talk about policy. So I think if Trump is going to go blisteringly personal to Biden, I think that's probably going to play into Biden's hands, because it will allow Biden to talk about Trump as a person. And you never know, there could be something outrageous. They could, Joe Biden could say, President Trump, you say that you weigh 270 pounds or however much it is, 240 pounds. I've bought a scale. Would you like to step on it? There's anything is possible. He could bring his tax returns along. It's entirely. He could ask him how much money he's earned in the last year. He could call him poor. I think yeah, you're right. A lot of Trump supporters see him as the strong man, and Trump certainly doesn't want to be seen as poor and fat and all of these things that he so holds dear.
And one thing to bear in mind with Trump's sexual assault allegations and the Hollywood tape is that Clinton had no moral authority in which to attack Trump on that.
No,
because all Trump had to do is bring out Bill Clinton's accusees. It'll be the same with Biden. Let's not forget that Biden stands accused of sexual assault himself. He
does. He stands accused of sexual assault, but I would, that whether or not those accusations are substantiated is another question. But yeah, you're right. It's very easy to turn the mirror around.
Yeah, the allegation sometimes is enough, isn't it, in these debates? Of course, one thing to look forward to is Trump's announcement that if he does lose to Joe Biden, that he will simply vanish and disappear, and we'll never see him again. Do we want to hold him to his word on that? Do we think he will?
How can we?
It depends again on the results themselves. But like I wrote in an article recently for you guys, there's a group of people called the Transition Integrity Project, who were a group of Republicans and Democrats who kind of gamed out specific scenarios of the election and what is likely to happen. And anything other than a Biden landslide is likely to lead to Trump not conceding and also violence on the streets. I think the best we can hope for is a kind of negotiated settlement. You might find that if Biden wins the Electoral College by a small margin, say he's less than 300 but more than 270, Trump might say, right, I'm going to concede, but you have to pardon these people. You have to promise that you're not going to prosecute me. I think it's important to remember that Trump will be in trouble with the law once he stops being president, and I think that's his primary goal to becoming reelected.
Of course, Trump's recently also come out. I'm interested to hear what you guys think on this. Is Trump going to go after Biden on his race record? Because Trump has just announced this platinum plan for African Americans. He's promising 3 million new jobs. He's promising 500,000 black-owned businesses if he's reelected. And of course, one major attack line that got wheeled out the instant Kamala Harris was announced as the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats was when Kamala Harris went after Joe Biden during the Democratic primary debates on his race record. And he's just going to reel out this attack line of, well, if his own vice presidential nominee doesn't have faith in his race record, why should you?
Well, it's a demographic that perhaps he could look to regain some support on. Trump is losing support of women. He's also losing support of suburban voters. I talked briefly about the fact that he's not doing terribly with the Latino vote, but there's complications surrounding that as well. So yeah, it might be electorally intelligent to do that.
I mean, look, Trump doesn't need African American voters to vote for him. He just needs them not to vote for Biden.
Just needs them to stay home. That's right. And he needs them it to be as difficult as possible to cast your vote, and that's why we're seeing talk of militias manning polling stations, ensuring that the vote is fair, and all of this kind of thing. Yeah, you're right. He needs to suppress the vote as much as he can. That gives him the best shot at victory.
I mean, we've all seen the clips of, those armed men in military-style gear, but do we know who they're actually affiliated with? Are they going to be walking around on polling day? Are they going to be on the prowl?
Are they going to be walking around after polling day as well, which is, while the votes are being counted, trying to stop things from being counted in a complete way? I think from a purely non-partisan perspective, I think it's vital that as many votes can be counted as humanly possible. Just the world is watching America. America for so many years has been the bastion of democracy and freedom, and everywhere around the world. This is why we're talking about this as a bunch of, what was the Reddit comment from the week? This is just a bunch of British people talking about what they've seen on the internet. Well, I'll have you know, I'm from New Zealand, but
plus, isn't the internet where most Americans get their news from anyway?
Well, quite, but Americans are more than welcome on this podcast. In fact,
that's true. They are more than welcome.
I mean, I would love, if you're out there and you're a Trump supporter, I would love to have you on, and I mean that absolutely genuinely. This is a firm invitation to have a chat about why you think the way you think and what you think is going to happen.
Mr. Shapiro, if you're listening.
Yeah. Similarly, I know personally at least perhaps more than 2 American people who listen to this because they are my close friends. And if they're listening, I would also like to hear you on at some time. We need more left-right libertarian unity.
Absolutely right.
You know who you are.
Without question.
Yes. And of course, keep the comments coming in, because although perhaps we don't like all the comments, we definitely like to see them. And it's nice that people engage in what we're saying. So definitely keep them coming in.
What you wish for there, Declan?
Asking for people to comment on the internet is always a dangerous game. I mean, on that note, just before we move on to the next part, I'm gonna ask Mason a question here, because Richard mentioned the impact that might have on the world if we do see perhaps militia style situation after the election, depending on what the result is, of course. But Mason, if there is some irregularities, if there is a legal challenge, a legal battle, if we do see soldiers on the streets in America, how does the rest of the world react to that?
I mean, I think the same way the rest of the world reacts whenever America does something terrible to their own people. We'll all sort of tut passive aggressively and then carry on trading with them.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I think there's been a lot has happened in the last 4 years, and the world's expectations have diminished as far as America's ability to govern itself in a way. So, I think, when we all woke up on November the 9th, 2016, a great proportion of us were surprised to see Trump win, but I think now if Trump does win, or if there is something close, or there's some irregularities, or there's militia on the streets, I think more people in the world won't be surprised as they would have been 4 years ago.
Oh, I was up all night watching the 2016 election live. Dare I rub my own crystal ball in hindsight? I was one of the few people who did predict that Trump might win, but it was a weird experience being there live watching it, because this was in Britain, let's bear in mind, and there were people with MAGA hats and US flag capes in this bar where I was watching it. It was a weird experience.
I'd like to describe it as a train crash happening incredibly slowly, but there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a good time to plug another live event, which Redaction Politics are in the process of organising. When the American election does happen on Tuesday, November 3rd, we will be live streaming the event with everybody who's currently here, plus more from the Redaction team. So if there is another train crash and you would like to watch us react to that train crash, then that's the place to be. But on an important note as well, we will be fundraising for the wonderful charity Safe Passage, who offer support to unaccompanied children who are refugees arriving in destination countries like the UK. We'll definitely be sharing all this in our links and comments, so please do have a look there. And of course, please come and join us on November 3rd. It's going to be, I think, an exciting night, no matter which way it goes.
And please donate.
Yes, of course.
Most critically of all.
Absolutely. Anything you can spare would be great. There'll be a link below to the Just Giving page that we've set up. And yeah, we'll be live all night. Who knows when this podcast will finish on Wednesday, November the 4th. There's every chance that there'll be some outstanding results, but you can guarantee that there'll definitely be some tension and expectation and drama.
And November the 4th is my birthday, so you better tune in for
Although,
that.
because not all the votes will be counted by the 4th. This does raise a question: are we going to continuously podcast for an entire week while all the mail-ins are counted?
Well, my wife is due to have a baby later that week, so I fear that I will be bowing out at some point in that week. But there will certainly be plenty of information for us to be talking about as the votes are counted. Yeah,
Indeed.
It's going to turn out to a complete anticlimax now, and there is a clear winner on the night.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we are talking about so much of it being disputed. 4 years ago, we were saying, by how many hundred electoral votes is Hillary Clinton going to win this by?
Well, yeah.
So and a bit like the general election of this country, of the UK in 2019, people were thinking, oh, will Boris get his majority? Will he not? Will there be a hung parliament? Will Corbyn be able to cobble together with some of the other minor parties? Will he not? And then 10 p.m. rolled around and he was forecasted to have 360 plus seats, and we were like, oh, great, okay, well, that's the end of the drama. So surprise is the order of the night.
I think one of the cases with the 2019 election, though, was that everyone was so used to mistrusting the polls. I mean,
yes,
the result we got was exactly what the polls said was going to happen. But people were saying, oh, no, maybe there'll be some larger margin of error than we're expecting. And no.
And if that holds true in the US, if somebody like Nate Silver is to be believed, then Biden will have 350 or so electoral votes, and Trump will have 180 or so electoral votes. And you never know, but we're not very trusting of pollsters and polls, are we?
I think there is an element of selective reporting going on when people say the polls are always wrong. But yeah, I mean, don't take polls at face value.